Hello, I'm Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to deconversion and atheist issues, and anything that goes along with those issues, such as Bible, theology, philosophy, politics, etc. I also want to give a shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Thank you for sticking with me through my hiatus. Can't get over how many people still stuck with me and the fact that the channel continued to grow despite it. So thank you once again. As you can see, we're going to continue on with our Sunday school. And for those of you following the series, just watching through it, you'll notice a change in background and things like that. That's because I moved. And so now I'm moving on with the series Sunday school. This is very much like a Sunday school class in the sense that I'm basically just going to go through the Bible and talk about it. But also I'm doing it from an atheist perspective and looking at it with a very critical eye and things like that. Now, today we're going to get into Genesis 4 and 5. And the big story in Genesis 4 and 5 is basically Cain and Abel. And chapter 5 is a genealogy, which I said right at the beginning, I'm not going to cover the genealogies unless I find something interesting in them. I'm just going to kind of zip through and say, yeah, they basically, this line leads to that line. In this particular case, chapter 5 is just nothing more than a genealogy from Adam to Noah, trying to connect the dots there. But chapter 4 starts off with Cain and Abel. And it really actually starts with, after Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden, the first thing that the Bible has to note right after that happens is Adam and Eve had sex and produced a child. I like the modern translations better because, they go, Adam made love to his wife and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she says, with the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man. And later she gave birth to her brother Abel, to his brother Abel. And a lot is made of, the children of Adam and Eve would have had to, basically take each other as wives and husbands. And it's an interesting genetic bottleneck. From a genetic standpoint, this just isn't possible. It would create a genetic bottleneck that would create a lot of mutations. Now, a lot of Christians will get around as well. God just preserved their genetics and so forth. So we're going to bring in miracles and shit, stuff we can't prove. And so, whenever we run into a problem that's insurmountable based on logic and science, we're just going to, bring in miracles. So here we have a case, though, where, it's not inconceivable. A lot of people say, oh, well, where did they get their wives from? Well, if you go forward into the genealogies, Adam and Eve are said to have had more children than are actually named. And so whenever I see atheists being critical along the lines of, well, who'd they marry? Where did the baby come from? It's like, do you bother to read the text, chapter 5? Because if you keep reading the text, it says that Adam had other sons and daughters. Okay, so there were, by the time Cain and Abel get old enough to offer sacrifice, it's very conceivable that Eve had many other children. If I were to believe the ages in this thing, in the genealogy later, Eve could have easily given birth to 300-400 kids in that time frame if she lived as long as her husband. So that's why the mother of all living has a different connotation when you fully consider the text. But in any case, she has a real problem because I'm not sure how a physical, of course, this is where all the creationists theorize that the world was different, people lived longer, they were healthier, so on and so forth. Personally, I think it's just an error in translation of ages. It could be or not, but at the same time, later on, the ages do drop off dramatically, and they're using the same interpretive method. So I'm not really sure there, but it doesn't really matter. The issue between Cain and Abel is one of sacrifice and what sacrifice matters. Cain works the soil, Abel keeps flocks. Um, they both bring their best stuff to the Lord. Um, and, Cain's offering is not accepted, Abel's is. Cain gets pissed off about it and gets angry, you know, about it. And, God says, if you don't do right, will you not be accepted? Now, a lot of people make a big deal about, oh, this is the first example of blood sacrifice being atonement, but this is not an atonement sacrifice. Later on in the book of Leviticus, there are grain offerings. There are ways to offer up the fruit of the ground as a sacrifice. So it can't be that. To me, I always thought that explanation was really bad because it's like, dude, later on, Leviticus has grain offerings. It has offering up the fruit of the ground to the Lord. You have bread offerings and all kinds of different offerings that don't have anything to do with blood. And there are other types of offerings that don't have to do with atonement that also involve the killing and slaughtering of sheep or offering up grain offerings. So it can't be that, okay? And so this theology that this is the first blood sacrifice to atone for sins is just nonsense because you don't really have that. This is an offering of praise, if it's anything, giving praise to God. But the reason maybe that, Cain's offering isn't accepted is kind of in the story, in the fact that, Cain there's something wrong and he doesn't do right and God sees it and so he doesn't accept his offering. And I think that's probably would be more logical to look at it from that point. Now, the people that put together these stories, for once, don't have to deal with too many alternative stories. They just kind of grab the story and put it here, which is nice. But what happens later is interesting because Cain and Abel meet in the field. They're talking with the other, and all of a sudden Cain attacks his brother and kills him. And then the Lord calls out to Cain, "Where's your brother Abel?" And he says, "I don't know. I'm not my brother's keeper." A famous line. And then, the Lord Jehovah here, well, not Yahweh here, it's Elohim, says, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. You are now under curse, driven to the ground, was open to the mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Will the ground no longer yield crops for you? You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Okay, so God has already cursed the ground for man's sake, and now he's doubled it up on Cain. So Cain literally cannot eat from the fruit of the ground. So he has to wander and beg and do whatever else he can do to get food. Cain says, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. You're driving from the land. I'll be a restless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." And so, God says, "I'm going to put a mark on you. And whoever kills Cain will suffer 7 times over." Now, the way God talks in that passage in verse 15, it's like there's a ton of other people already. If Cain and Abel, let's say, we don't know how old they are, but let's say they're 60, 70 years old at this point, everybody's living to be 900 after all. There's plenty of other sons and daughters of Eve. They've had kids and they've had kids. You could conceivably have 4 or 5 generations in that time space if you get going early. So, there could be a lot of people by that time. The problem, of course, is the genetic bottleneck. It's going to take a while. The way the Bible gets over this genetic bottleneck is basically to give everybody a long time to live. And apparently genetic defects don't exist at this point. Or if they do, nobody mentions them. Other than, later on when you have giants and stuff, which I'll note in a minute. And so Cain gets this mark. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the theology around what the mark of Cain is has been used for a lot of different reasons, most of them bad. One of the big things that it got used for is racism, that the mark of Cain is actually, that's what, happened. That's why African Americans are black or whatever, or they have different racism has been justified with this mark of Cain thing, where people, have been marked. I remember talking to somebody who believed very, very strongly that this is why black people were black. And I said, "Well, how do you know that? Why couldn't have God struck him white?" You don't know that it's not the other way around. You're making an assumption because you're white and you want to feel superior. And so this whole mark of Cain thing really, on a practical level, has just been used for a lot of shit. And it just really drives you nuts when you see it used that way. So that's probably my biggest thing. Later on, you know, Cain leaves. He finds a wife. Would have had to have been one of his mother's descendants, either a daughter, cousin, something. By this time, everybody's really related yet. The genetic bottleneck thing, I'm not going to let go because this would be a real problem. This would be a real issue. So probably the most notable person after that is Lamech. Lamech marries two wives. It's the first example of polygamy in the Bible. Not that I have a problem with polygamy myself. Whatever marriage relationship is consensual or whatever, I don't have a problem with. The issue here, though, is Lamech takes a bunch of stuff on himself. He's a very prideful man. He kills somebody and then says, hey, if vengeance is going to be sevenfold on Cain, it'll be 70-fold for me. And not that God tells him that, but he takes it upon himself. That's the case. Okay. And then you have all these different sons of Abda, that's people that live in tents and raise livestock. Jubal is the guy who created music. Zillah is the person who creates bronze and iron. And so you have this idea that all this civilization stuff exists very early. And I'm not really sure that that's true. The archaeological evidence for how technology has developed is very slow, very meticulous, slowly over time. It's only in recent years that we've reached a point where we've had a knowledge explosion, and mostly because of information being exchanged freely thanks to the internet. It was information and knowledge being contained in certain areas that kept technology from advancing. And so, you'd have some blacksmith come up with some way of forging steel, but nobody else knew it. And then when he died, if he didn't pass it on to his apprentice, then that secret died with him. And a lot of that happened. That was a lot of early technology. And here we got the technology just popping up right away. And it's just unbelievable to me, especially at this early point. And then, of course, Adam, makes love to his wife again, and has, another son, Seth. And Seth has a son named Enosh, and so on and so forth. And then people begin to call upon God. Now, the thing about this at the end of chapter 4 is you have Abel dead, you have Cain off, still living, doing his thing. There's no justice for Abel, in my humble opinion. God really lets Cain go, in my opinion, because Abel's laying dead, and Cain gets away with it for the most part, and God actually protects him despite the fact that he murdered his brother. Now, that's an interesting moral conundrum for me. One of the great problematic things I had with the Old Testament, particularly Genesis, is how much the characters in Genesis violate the law that will be established later. Murder, when you get to Exodus, Leviticus, and further, murder is punishable by death. Okay, but that's not what God does here. You'll see this a lot when Simeon and Levi avenged their sister for being raped by this dude. Jacob gets all pissed off. You're going to make me a laughingstock. But later on, you see in the law where, rape, that kind of rape is punishable by death. You get the other one, a few other ones, like later on in the law, you're not allowed to marry, a man isn't allowed to marry a woman and her sister, which would undercut Jacob again. So there's a lot of things that happen in Genesis that are allowed. And so the whole incest question too here is really moot too, because there is no laws against incest at this time period, and the theist has a decent defense here, saying, hey, the laws just don't exist yet. Well, but my counter to that as an atheist is, but then God changes. He's not immutable. He changes the way he deals with human beings over time. He changes the way he acts with human beings over time. And so what he promotes as ethical and right changes. Okay, so there is no absolute right and wrong with God in this particular case. And so it's kind of one of those things where you kind of look at it and go, you know, God seems to be very human here. And so there's a changing ethics, there's a changing morality. Chapter 5 is really just an account of Adam's family line. Um, you know, Adam lives 800 years, has other sons and daughters. He lived a total of 930 years. Named him Seth. His son Seth isn't born until he's 130 years old, and he has other sons and daughters. So in 800 years, assuming Eve has, and it doesn't say that Adam didn't marry another woman later either, like one of his descendants, Lamech. So, it's possible that Adam had like 1,000 kids based on the story. And this is the way that the Bible itself seems to get away from the genetic bottleneck. The ancient people knew there was a problem when people too closely related had kids, because often the kids would be genetically defective, and they knew that. So they began to realize, okay, you need to keep them at least cousin level before and those kind of rules have always been sketchy in societies. But slowly over time, cultures have really developed this idea you're not supposed to marry your sister or brother. You're not supposed to, marry your daughter or your son, things like that. It became pretty obvious that this is not something you should do. It's not a good idea. And, but, and so the way the Bible gets past that kind of ancient understanding of the genetic bottleneck is we're just going to let them live forever. And they're just going to have a bunch of kids. If you had a bunch of shots, eventually, something good's going to happen. So that's how they get away. And then you have all these different people that live. Enoch is probably notable in the sense that he doesn't die. God just takes him. Methuselah, of course, lives to be a ridiculous 969 years old. It's interesting that the later characters that are listed in this genealogy all die the same year that the flood supposedly took place. The one thing I'll give the biblical writers credit for is they realized that they needed to have that consistency, that all these end characters in the line of Adam had to die the same year. And, and that year had to be the year that Noah's flood took place. So I'll give them that. But that's Genesis 4 and 5. I think the largest problems in it are the genetic bottleneck that you're going to run into when you're trying to deal with this stuff. And then you also have the racism justified by the mark of Cain. You have some interesting incestual relationships that would have had to take place that would have caused further genetic issues. The whole story at this point gets really weird because it doesn't seem that God is enforcing the morality that he will absolutely enforce later. Murder later is punishable by death. Okay. But here Cain kills his brother and pretty much gets away with it, goes off and has other kids. So God doesn't really get after Cain as much as he gets after later people. I mean, literally later he'll have a guy killed for picking up sticks on the Sabbath. But here, and this is the inconsistent morality of the Bible that's all the way through the Pentateuch, because you have the historical characters that actually live and do different things. I mean, it's like David later. David literally sets a guy up to get killed because, he committed adultery and had a kid with this other woman, Bathsheba, and gets away with it. Okay, he literally, it's like God plays favorites. And this is another contradiction in the Bible, because one of the things that gets interesting is, later on Christians say, oh, well, God doesn't play favorites. God doesn't show partiality. Well, yeah, but he fucking does. Okay. How did Cain get away with it? How does Cain get away with murder when murder, according to God's, ultimate moral law, is punishable by death? If the Bible was going to be consistent at this point, God should have come along and said, "You killed your brother, therefore I'm going to zap you," and should have killed Cain on the spot. Okay. But for some reason, Cain gets special treatment. That is partiality. You can't get away from the fact that despite the claim that God doesn't show partiality, he does show partiality through the Bible. And the story of Cain and Abel is a great story of that. Is a very consistent thing. So that's kind of where I'm standing with the whole Genesis 4 and 5. It's just the Cain and Abel story has a lot of problems, and the genealogy is just ridiculous with how long people live, the genetic bottleneck issues. Yeah, this just isn't a realistic story, and that's why it's mythology. From a mythology standpoint, from what ancient people understood, they do a pretty good job. But when you put in a modern understanding of how things really work, yeah, it just doesn't work. There's just this too many massive problems. And I'm just highlighting some of the top ones that people highlight. There's many more I could go into. All right, I want to thank you once again for stopping by. I appreciate you hanging out with the Sunday school with me, and I appreciate the fact that some of you stuck along through my long hiatus. Hopefully, I'll be getting back to doing the Sunday school every Sunday, and then I'll probably do some sort of editorial video during the week. That's about all I can do right now, given how busy I am as a teacher. So I'm really kind of moving forward. I want to thank everybody that had a few private messages about my concerns about my own personal issues, such as my marriage and things like that. I want to appreciate everybody that has kind of expressed their concern. I'm very glad, though, that a lot of you didn't say, and I'm sending thoughts and prayers. Thank you for not doing that. Thoughts and prayers to me are useless. So I want to appreciate all of you for, just offering you some of your emotional and support to that, and I appreciate it. But once again, thanks for stopping by. You can, of course, I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Facebook. That's the best way to personally message me. A lot of my videos go down there, and so every video and every like, share, subscribe there helps as well. And of course, you can support me on Patreon. The links are in the description. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters. There's different levels of support in Patreon, from $1 all the way up to 25, and 25 earns you, being a citizen, a full-fledged member of the Council of the Rabyd Nation. So that has its perks, like, making suggestions for videos that, I will take very, very seriously. So thank you once again for the Rabyd Nation, all the support. I appreciate all of you, and hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabyd Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.